You've been triggered by something small, a tone of voice, a certain look, a pause that lasted half a second too long. And suddenly you're not reacting to what just happened, you're reacting to something that happened 15 years ago. This is the machinery behind emotional flashbacks, and it's running constantly beneath your decisions, your relationships, your sense of who you are. The worst part is that most people don't even recognize when they're inside one. Here's what makes emotional flashbacks so disorienting. They arrive without images. A combat veteran might get a visual flashback. A scene, a sound, a specific memory. Emotional flashbacks skip the scene entirely. You just get the feeling. The raw, unprocessed emotional state from an earlier time in your life lands on you like weather. Shame. Dread. That shrinking sensation where you feel 8 years old in a 40-year-old body, and because there's no accompanying image, no obvious memory attached, your brain does something predictable. It looks around the current environment and assigns the feeling to whatever's in front of you. Your partner asks why you didn't take out the trash. The feeling that floods in is catastrophic. Disproportionate. You know it's disproportionate. Some part of you is watching yourself overreact in real time. But knowing changes nothing in the moment, because the emotional state has its own logic, its own timeline, its own version of what's dangerous. So why does this keep happening? Why do these old states keep resurfacing instead of fading? The answer sits in how emotional memories get stored. Regular memories go through a process where the brain contextualizes them, stamps them with a time, a place, a beginning and an end. They become stories. That happened to me when I was 12, in that house, with that person. The timestamp matters because it tells your brain the event is over, past tense, filed away. Traumatic emotional memories often skip this filing process. They get stored without context, without timestamps, in a raw sensory format that your brain treats as perpetually current. Think of it like a document saved without a date. Every time your system pulls it up, it reads as happening right now. The feeling has no expiration label, so your body responds as though the original situation is still unfolding. And your body is doing exactly what it was designed to do. The problem is that it's solving for a threat that ended years ago. The pattern recreation piece is where this gets mechanical. When an emotional flashback activates, it doesn't just bring the feeling, it brings the entire behavioral repertoire you developed in response to that feeling as a child. If your survival strategy was people-pleasing, you people-please. If it was withdrawal, you withdraw. If it was hypervigilance, scanning every face for micro-expressions of anger, you're scanning before you've taken a conscious breath. These responses made sense once. A kid who learns to read the room and adjust their behavior to avoid an unpredictable parent is running a sophisticated survival program. The program worked. The issue is that the program keeps running in contexts where it's destructive. You're reading your partner's face with the same software you use to read your parents' face. Same scanning protocol, same threat calibration, same emergency response. Different person, different decade entirely. Now here's where the loop tightens. The behavioral response triggered by the flashback tends to create exactly the kind of interpersonal dynamic that confirms the original wound. You withdraw from your partner because the flashback tells you closeness is dangerous. Your partner feels shut out and becomes frustrated. Their frustration registers on your scanning system as the very threat you were trying to avoid. The flashback deepens. You withdraw further. Your brain logs the interaction as evidence that closeness really is dangerous, reinforcing the original pattern. This is a closed circuit. Each repetition strengthens the wiring, and the cruelest feature of the design is that you experience each loop as fresh evidence rather than a recycled script. Some people live inside this loop for decades without naming it. They just think they're bad at relationships, or that they're too sensitive, or that something is fundamentally wrong with them. The vocabulary matters here, because I'm too sensitive is a character judgment. I'm experiencing an emotional flashback that's activating a childhood survival response is a mechanical description. One leaves you stuck, the other gives you something to interrupt. The interruption point exists in a specific window. Between the trigger and the full behavioral response, there's a gap. Sometimes it's a few seconds, sometimes it lasts a breath. The gap is where the emotional flashback is arriving, but the old pattern hasn't fully taken over your motor system yet. You can feel it, that moment where the wave is rising, but your hands haven't clenched, your voice hasn't changed, your posture hasn't shifted into its defensive shape. That gap is trainable. It gets wider with practice. The practice looks less like forcing yourself to respond differently and more like learning to recognize the flashback while it's happening. Recognition is the intervention. When you can say, even internally, even silently, this is old, you introduce the timestamp your brain originally failed to attach. You're manually filing the document with a date, and a dated document loses its power to masquerade as the present. Critics of this framework point out that simply labeling a feeling doesn't resolve its underlying cause. They're right. Labeling alone won't rewire decades of conditioned response, but the labeling creates a gap between experience and reaction that didn't exist before. Research on affect labeling shows measurable decreases in emotional intensity when people put precise language to what they're feeling. The label functions as a circuit breaker. Brief, imperfect, but enough to prevent the full cascade from firing automatically every time. The deeper work involves something counterintuitive. The old emotional states need to be felt, actually felt, in the body with full attention, rather than managed or suppressed or argued away. When you suppress a flashback, you're essentially refusing to process the document again, which means it stays unfiled. It stays without a timestamp. It stays current. The body keeps presenting it because, from the body's perspective, the event is still unresolved. Feeling it fully, while simultaneously maintaining awareness that it belongs to the past, is the combination that allows the memory to finally get filed. You're providing both the emotional activation and the contextual information at the same time. The feeling says, this is real. The awareness says, this already happened. When those two things exist in the same moment, something shifts. The urgency drains. The pattern loosens its grip. Sometimes just slightly, sometimes all at once. People who've done this work describe a strange experience. The trigger still fires, the feeling still arrives, but the behavioral cascade doesn't follow automatically. There's space where the compulsion used to be. The tone of voice that once sent you spiraling now registers as just a tone of voice. You notice it, you feel a flicker, and then you're choosing what to do next, instead of being piloted by a program written before you could tie your shoes. The patterns don't dissolve in one session, one insight, one conversation. They dissolve through repeated experiences where the old feeling activates and the catastrophic outcome fails to materialize. Each time the flashback fires and reality doesn't match the prediction, your partner's frustration doesn't lead to danger, the moment of vulnerability doesn't result in punishment, your brain updates the file. Slowly, reluctantly, the way any system trained on thousands of data points updates when new evidence contradicts the model. One corrective experience barely registers, 20 start to shift the weight. 100 rewrite the prediction. The hardest part is staying in the room when every cell is telling you to run the old program. Because the old program feels like safety, it feels like wisdom, it feels like you. And disentangling survival responses from identity is the real work. The kind that happens in the gap between the trigger and the response, one breath at a time, for longer than anyone wants to hear. You've been running someone else's emergency broadcast on loop. The signal that taught you to flinch came from a station that stopped transmitting years ago.